Making choices is a part of our life. Every day, we are confronted with choices and we have to make those choices. Some of the choices that we make are really trivial, not a big deal. Maybe what socks you're going to wear, or what you're going to have for dinner or lunch, or what brand of toothpaste you're going to buy, if it really matters. But then there are choices that are more important and significant, such as, where do we want to retire? Do we go home to the Philippines? Do we stay here? Do we move to another state? Where do we want to send our kids to school? Or which universities you will apply for? Or what course you're going to take? Or perhaps who you're going to marry? That's a tough choice. That's a very important choice. A lot of smiles all over the place. Or what home you're going to buy. These are big decisions, big choices that one way or another we have to make those choices sooner or later. I like the story that comes out of the Vietnam War era. A sergeant who served his last tour of duty was reassigned to a stateside induction center. And his main job was to induct or to brief those who are coming into the army and would later on be deployed. But what was interesting about this guy is that soon after he started, nearly 100% insurance sales were sold. He hit the record. And his officers were astonished. What is this guy doing? Making sure that everyone had insurance before they are deployed. And so, one of his officers, instead of asking him directly, interviewing him, decided to sit in one of his sessions. He sat at the back and listened to what his sales pitch was. And so this guy explained the basics of GI insurance to these new recruits. And then he said, if you have GI insurance and go into battle and don't make it back, the government is obligated to pay your family $35,000, which was a big amount at that time. Now, if you don't have GI insurance, you go into the battle, you don't come back alive, the government has to pay a maximum of $3,000. So $35,000 versus $3,000. And then he asked the question to his recruits, which bunch do you think the government is going to send into the battlefield first? And so they sign up for the insurance. Pretty easy choice to make, right? Now, as parents, we have the responsibility of raising our children well, in a way that when they are grown and then they are confronted with decisions of their own, they will make the right choices. I believe that's every parent's dream, because we will not be here forever. And slowly but surely, our hope is that from young age, we teach them, okay, this is better than this one. And then as they grow up, we give them more leeway, more freedom, hoping that what we taught them in making choices, they would have imbibed and made a part of their own. We spend many years with our children teaching them about life, about God, about what is right and what is wrong. And someday, they will certainly be on their own and will make their own choices. And we just hope and pray that they make the right decisions. They won't always make the right decisions. We didn't. But hopefully, on the average, more often than not, they would make such right decisions. You see, our subject this morning has to do with a man named Joshua. Not my son. Not Vic is not here. Not his son either. But Joshua of the Old Testament, the guy who took over when Moses, the man of God, was taken by God. He took over the leadership of the nation of Israel. But he was old in this chapter, well advanced in years. His primary concern was, when I'm gone, will my country, will my nation make the right decisions concerning God, concerning their life in this promised land? By the way, they're already in the promised land. They've spent 7 years conquering that land. Not every parcel of land, but most of the territory that God promised to them, to Israel, they have invaded and settled into. So his concern was, will they continue in the ways that I have led them? Will they continue to honor God? Will they build upon the legacy that he is about to leave them with? But the people, nevertheless, had to choose God for themselves. And this morning, I'd like to share with you how you and I, like the Israelites, should choose decisively, deliberately, and openly, because our choices matter. Whom will you serve? That in particular, maybe not the other mundane choices that we make, but in particular, what I believe is the most important decision that you and I can ever make is, whom will we serve? So, we begin by reading verses 14 to 15 of chapter 24. But I would suggest that you read the whole chapter 24, because that will provide you with the whole context of what we're studying this morning. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Choose whom you will serve. If there is one choice that you should focus on the entirety of your life, choose whom you will serve. There is no doubt about what Joshua is after. He mentions the word serve 6 times in just 2 verses. And, of course, his intention is that in the end, the spiritual, intellectual, and moral restlessness that marked so many lives of his fellow Israelites would be settled before he left. Joshua demanded a commitment when he said, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. This wasn't just a simple matter. This wasn't just a suggestion. This was an encouragement, an exhortation coming from his heart. Because, as you would read in verses 1 to 13, he has known who this God is. The God who is faithful even when they were unfaithful. He fulfilled his promise to bring them into the promised land. And he made them victorious over the enemies in that promised land, giving them their inheritance of the land. Hundreds of years later, a prophet of God named Elijah stood on Mount Carmel against the prophets of Baal, a false god. And he too offered a challenge to his fellow Israelites, saying, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. But you have to choose whom you will serve. Joshua urged his fellow Israelites to consider the options. Who is it that they could have served? He mentioned several of those in the previous verses that we read. He said, well, you could follow the gods of Mesopotamia, where Abraham and his family came from. Okay? The gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the Euphrates River. Or they could worship the gods of Egypt. Remember, that's where they came from, where they lived for 400 years. Egypt had its own set of gods. And Joshua challenged, okay, you can go back and to worshiping those gods if you wish. Or if you prefer, remember when they went to the promised land, Canaan, there were Canaanites. Huh? And those Canaanites had their own set of gods as well. So Joshua told his fellow Israel, okay, if you're not into the gods of the Mesopotamians or the gods of Egypt, maybe you would like to embrace and serve the gods of the Canaanites, where you now live. But then, of course, he said, you can also choose to serve the living God, Yahweh, whom we have known from the beginning, who has been faithful ever since, and who has fulfilled every single promise that he had made. That was the challenge. And like I said, Joshua reflects in verses 1 to 13 of chapter 24 on the faithfulness of that God. And he says the only reasonable response to the overwhelming waves of God's faithfulness is to serve him. To serve him. By the way, if you move fast forward to the New Testament, you will read just about the same thing. In Romans chapter 12, and I present to you a paraphrase by F.F. Bruce, one of the New Testament history writers. He says, so then, brothers, in view of all these mercies that God has bestowed on you, I now make this plea. Present your bodies to God. Present them as a sacrifice, a living one, not a lifeless one, a holy one, because it is offered to a holy God, and one in which he will take pleasure. For when you consider your indebtedness to God, the consecration of your lives in his service is your logical act of worship. It is the only logical thing to do in response to what God has and continues to do in our lives, in their lives as well. It's the only reasonable thing, the only appropriate response to what God has done. So, the question, therefore, if I have convinced you so far to serve the living God just as Joshua and his household and his nation did, is how do you choose? How do you choose to serve God? Let me suggest to you 3 ways. Choose decisively. Are you like that guy? Admit it. There are far too many individuals in church today, sad to admit, that are trying to keep one foot in the world and one foot in the church. Or when you came today, of course you went with both feet. No, that's not what I mean. Okay. What I mean is that they don't want to make a commitment one way or another. They want to enjoy both worlds, the best of both worlds. And I can assure you, there are still so many things in this world that you and I enjoy. Huh? We're not denying that. And yet, we have to choose sooner than later to serve God. Some people, some Christians, don't want to give up their sin in order to really be right with God. They love their sin so much. We love our sin so much. We won't let it go. And so, we live hugging our sin, and then when Sunday comes, we try, I don't know how we do it, but we try to release our hold on that sin and become holy for an hour or so. And so they end up sitting on the fence, not really a part of the world and not really a part of the church either. Joshua challenges us to acknowledge that it is time to make a decision. 1, enter the world and live by its standards and collect its rewards, no matter how temporary those rewards may be. Or 2, decide to follow God wholeheartedly and without reservation. Like I said, sooner or later, one has to make that decision. Some think it is safe to stay in the middle and enjoy the best of both worlds. This is simply not true, because you probably can attest to this, that when you're in the middle, you get hit from both sides. Believers will wonder, why are you not serving God? You've been a Christian for so long, and yet you still stay on the sidelines, not wanting to make a commitment one way or another, at least a commitment for God. You're not serving. And then on the other hand, the unbelievers will look at you and see, why are you still doing the things that we do? Aren't you a Christian? So you see, you get it both ways if you stay in the middle. It's not a good place to be in. Well, Pastor, some would say that I don't want to do it now. Well, I'd like to kick the can down the road to make that decision later. Now is not a good time. The truth is that for some, there is never a good time. Why do I say that? Because they will not come to Christ when they are up, when things are good, because they don't sense the need to come to Christ and to serve Him. Everything's well. I'm blessed. So I'll continue to be blessed in myself and not serve. There's no need. On the other hand, they won't come to Christ either when they're down because they're too proud. I've neglected the Lord. I haven't chosen Him all the time, and now that I'm down, I will call on Him. Will He even bother to respond to my cry? Oh, pity me. I'm so proud. No, I won't turn to God. They won't come either when they are in between because they don't even take time to think about it. There could be no mixing of allegiance to God with other gods. I hope that by now, that's a settled truth in our minds. No one can serve two masters. Either you will love one and hate the other. When Joshua led the children of Israel into the promised land, they had picked up the contemporary religious practices and, in fact, had mingled with those inhabitants. And they had a very nice way of mixing the Word of God, the commands of God, with the practices, the religious practices of the inhabitants of the land. Huh? That's a brilliant way of doing things, right? Of living your life. Mixing diversity. Huh? But with God, it doesn't work. A firm choice had to be made then, as well as every generation to follow. Men and women must choose between expediency and principle, between this world and eternity, between God and anything that would try to take His place. Don't fool yourself. It will never work. You have to choose to serve God decisively, sooner than later. There's another aspect to this choice. It's choosing deliberately. What do we mean by this? Well, Joshua was 110 years old by the time this story came around. He was a soldier, hardened with battle. He bore the scars of long-term commitment. Even before he ascended to the leadership, the top leadership of Israel, he was already the assistant of Moses. In fact, when in one of the battles, Moses was praying at the top of a mountain, he was there in the battlefield. So he knew what battle is like, what fighting is like for God against their enemies. And he had carefully considered, deliberated, and intentionally decided to serve the Lord. By this time, 110 years old, bless his soul, no? I don't know if we will ever live that long in this earth. But 110 years living in this world taught him one thing, that as for him and his household, they will serve the Lord. That was a deliberate choice on his part, a deliberate decision that he made for himself and his household. And later on we will see for the rest of the nation of Israel. In his study of Joshua, Francis Schaeffer points out that when Joshua challenged the people to choose to serve God and affirmed that this was his settled choice as well, the tense that he used, the verb tense that he used, implied more than just a once-for-all decision. In fact, what he was saying, the tense in which this choice was made, was rendered, meant that I have chosen to serve the Lord. I am choosing the same path of service now, and I will go on choosing to serve God until the very end. It's a continuous action on his part. It's not a one-time thing. Okay, today I choose to serve the Lord. Tomorrow, we'll see. That's not what Joshua was saying and challenging his people with. He was saying, I serve the Lord. I am choosing to serve the Lord today and until the rest of my life. I will never waver from that decision. I will never stray away. I will never turn my back on that decision. I will continue to choose to serve God. That's deliberate choice. We were talking about last night and how these wonderful people and more, no? That not everyone there was there last night. But anyway, the point is, I coordinated the previous year's Valentine's, my wife and I. This year we decided, let's give it to somebody else. And we did. We picked a couple. And you know what they did? They went with it. And once they said yes, oh, it went. I can assure you it went. And it went wonderfully. They gathered people around themselves who will work with them. And last night was a resounding success. I could not have done, my wife and I could not have done it any better than what they did last night. And why is that? Well, because they deliberately chose to serve God in this manner, in this fashion. You know who you are. And we're blessed because these are up and coming stars in WCFI. And bless your heart, bless your soul, because you have chosen to serve the Lord. And I can name so many more. Edgar and Sonia were the first ones to step up. We talked about it. And they handled the children's church from day one that this church started having worship services. And you know what it takes, to lead a children's church? You're away from the worship service. And I believe it's just once a month that they're able to join us for worship service. The rest of the time, they were with the kids. But they were resolved in teaching the children while we were enjoying our worship. Well, they were enjoying the children as well. But you see, their deliberate choice led them to handle the kids. Brother James, sarap ng 2008 was when you first joined us? Tama ba? Okay. Oh, you all know where he lives. He has lived there ever since. So, Lodi is about at least an hour away. But he first came, then Emily followed, then Jennifer followed, and then Jara followed. And the rest is history. It's 10 years, kapatid. It's been 10 years. And I could count with the fingers of my hand the times that he was absent from worship service. Yetsky is absent today. and Dang, and he's there. Okay, he's not. Oh, see? My mistake. You know how difficult it is for them to come over? It's preparing. Hey, you prepare to go on Sunday service. They prepare Edward as well. Talk to them one of these days and try to find out how hard it is. But since the time that they learned about, it was Word International then, we met them in Morristown, Parsippany yata, no? Parsippany, at the first time. They have not relented in their commitment to this church. I can only talk about what I see in church, what you do outside of the church, in your workplace, how you serve God there. That's admirable. But what I have seen is that when children of God choose deliberately, guess what? They often exceed expectations. Why? Because they're so focused on doing the things that God has told them to do and giving God the glory. And so it's no surprise that when you give this task to them, or when then they obey and serve the Lord, they shoot beyond what they initially expected to do and accomplish. That's what deliberate choices mean and make. Once they decided to serve the Lord in this capacity, they make that decision week in and week out. No hesitation. No excuses to miss church. I can't mention everybody, but you know who you are, who have chosen and continues to choose deliberately. There's a third one. We choose. Choose openly. Openly. Joshua called on the elders, all the people of Israel that day, all the tribes. When he declared his decision to serve the Lord, he did it in front of all of Israel. Everybody knew about it. He was not ashamed to show his commitment to God. In fact, he wanted everyone to know where he stood as far as his devotion to the Lord was concerned. No secrets. He came out in the open and declared before all, "As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." But you might say, weren't they all worshipers of God? And when we're in the company of worshipers, it's safe. We can clap our hands, we can raise our hands, we can sing as loud as we want, led by our person worship team. No shame. Remember though, that at that time he challenged Israel. It was a time when some of the Israelites were beginning to waver in their faith and their commitment to God. They've forgotten most of what they experienced in Egypt. You remember how in the middle of their wandering in the wilderness, some of them wanted to go back? They said, at least in Egypt we had this, we had that. Now we only have manna every day. Fast forward to Canaan. They have now experienced the land flowing with milk and honey. So they made a lot of progress. But then again, in progress, sometimes we forget. And they saw these other inhabitants doing other strange things with their strange gods. And some of them probably appealed to them. I remember my wife telling me her stories about being a Protestant. She was taken in by her grandma who worshipped in a UCCP church in the Philippines, and how that her siblings, when they go to the Catholic church, they would have veils, they would have kneelers. No, nice. Completos recados, no? And while going to the Protestant church, there was nothing. No? You just go there, listen to the sermon, sing a few hymns, and then go home. No, nothing of the sort. We don't even practice it here. No, where you have to stand, you have to sit, you have to kneel, you have to make the sign of the cross, you have to take communion. Well, we do communion, but none of those frills. And probably some of the religious practices of the Canaanites began to appeal to these Israelites, and their faith in Yahweh was beginning to waver. And so Joshua had to address that. He had to disturb their practices, shake them in their boots so that they would serve the Lord. If Joshua lived in New Testament times, his favorite verse might have been Romans 1:6. Just my speculation. I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes, first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. You couldn't stop him from declaring his desire to serve the Lord. He was unafraid. He was unashamed. Of course, Jesus had something to say to those who had a private confidence in him, but who were unwilling to acknowledge him in public. What were those words? Whoever disowns me before men, I will disown him before my Father in heaven. You see, loyalty to God counts a lot in spiritual terms. Because you cannot really serve God and someone else or something else. God is a jealous God. He wants all of you because He gave all of Him. Never say that you believe in Christ if you are not willing to identify yourself as one of His disciples. And perhaps that's why we are stymied in sharing the gospel. Because we are ashamed to tell everybody else that we are the follower of Christ. Whether it's in your home, in your business, in your social life, in your social media life, especially. In fact, wherever you go. Let me say this, and this is probably a wake-up call for us Christians here in America. We are at war. We are in a spiritual battle. Are you aware of that? Do you know that? That there is a spiritual war raging in this country, fighting for the soul of this nation? Wake up. It's no joke. It's not manufactured. It's not fake news. It's real. We are at war. Our values are under attack. Judeo-Christian values are under attack. We are under attack. How do you know that? In school, can you talk about Jesus? Can you talk about God? Oh no. At work, you probably will be fired. It's a cause, probable cause. I don't know how your management looks at it or treats it. But if you begin to shake the boat, where does that come from? It's a spiritual warfare. It used to be that abortion is supposed to be safe, legal, and rare. That was the narrative before, when Roe versus Wade was first approved, made into law. But today, is abortion still safe, legal, and rare? Maybe, I don't know about safe. Legal, yes. But is it rare? In fact, Planned Parenthood was proud enough to say that last year they had the most number of abortions in America. I don't have the exact figure. 300,000 plus, maybe. And now, it's getting worse. It has gotten worse. Because it used to be that abortion had to have restrictions. Forget about the restrictions. You heard about the Virginia governor narrating what would happen if a failed abortion results in a baby coming out alive. What would happen? Oh, they will provide comfort to the baby while the mother and the doctor discuss what will happen to the child. What? What has happened to America? You know the word for that? Infanticide. That's the killing of a baby. And yet, it's legal in America, some of the states. Some would say that, the church should not be involved in any of this because that's not its purview. It's not within its realm. You remember William Wilberforce? He was a British politician, lived in 1759 to 1813. Philanthropist, leader of the movement to stop the slave trade. And he succeeded. He became a member of Parliament, the British Parliament, and he pushed and pushed until it became illegal to have slaves and to trade slaves. He was a Christian, by the way. Oh, you know Martin Luther King Jr., of course. But did you know that he was a pastor? He came from a line of pastors. That he wasn't a politician. He was a spiritual leader. And what did he fight for? He fought against racism. Huh? That we should not be judged by the color of our skin, but our character. He fought for that and he died for that. What was he? A Christian. A Christian pastor. Was it within his realm to fight against racism? Of course. Was it within the area of the church to delve into racism? Of course. So, today, what issues do we face? Do our social media friends even know where we stand on these spiritual issues? Or are the issues that we stand for and are fighting for aligned with the teachings of the Bible? Are these issues real or only perceived? And I know there are a lot of advocacies today. You just have to open your Facebook and you see all. But out of so many of these causes, which ones do you think align with your values that you should be supporting? Whom will you serve? And the reason why choices are important is because not only for our lives, but because our choices also influence others. Joshua ended his address with what has become known as one of the most powerful and courageous testimonies and witness in all of Scripture. He said, "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." This statement is the culmination of a life lived in obedience to God and His Word. There were times when Joshua failed. There were times when he was discouraged. But once Joshua had committed his life to God, he turned towards following the Lord. Joshua not only influenced his own household, by the way, he was also able to motivate many others to serve the Lord. For bad or good, our influence always extends beyond our immediate surroundings. And so in verses 16 to 17, the people's response was, "Far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. It was the Lord our God Himself," so and so forth. He protected us on our entire journey and among all nations to which we traveled. Bottom line, choice of Israel had long-lasting results. For in Joshua 24:24, we see their decision. They said to Joshua, "We will serve the Lord our God and obey Him." The voice of one was able to influence the voices of many and the decisions of many. Israel, and this is the good news, the good result. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. Our spouse, our children, relatives, friends, neighbors will see and notice the difference that God makes in our lives because we have chosen to serve Him. Hopefully this will influence them to worship and serve God as well. Whom will you serve? Perhaps you need to make a decision today for Christ. That's the most important decision. It's the decision that has eternal consequences. For that decision will not only affect your life here, but your life forever. I beg you not to put it off any longer. Please remember that when you are faced with a choice and you refuse to make one, you have already made a choice. Let me repeat that. When you are faced with a choice and you decide not to make a choice, you have already made a choice. If you're a Christian and believe that Christianity is all about you, that God is obligated to make your life happy, then you need to choose to serve the Lord from this day on. Stop making God a parking attendant who'll give you a space in a parking lot, or a genie who will grant every selfish desire that you have, that you can think of. For once, start thinking of how God can fulfill His purposes through you, and not how God can fulfill your own self-serving desires. We live in an age when the Lord, He is looking for men and women of fearless faith who will step up and step out to accomplish something great, wonderful for Him. And He has a wonderful plan, not only for us, but for the entire humanity. And if we will allow ourselves to be used of Him, to serve Him, then the angels in heaven will surely rejoice with us. So, whom will you serve? Whom will you serve? As I close, I'd like to, as Joshua did, I'd like to pose to you that same challenge today. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Will you serve the Lord as well? All eyes closed, all heads bowed. If you want to make a commitment to serve the Lord, not just to be saved by Him, but to serve Him from this day forward, I believe He wants you, He wants to see you make that commitment today with a hand raised. Simple act. But of course, that hand that is raised comes from a decision made in the heart. Would you raise your hand to acknowledge that you would like to serve the living God from this day on? I don't know how you're going to do it. I don't know how God will lead you to serve Him. But the important thing today is, are you willing to serve the Lord? Raise a hand. Don't be ashamed. That's from the heart. That's between you and God. Not between you and me.